Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is November 27, 2022. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Mike Murphy. Mike, where in the heck you calling in from?
I'm here in Mar Vista, California, East Venice.
Mar, Mar Vista, and I'm in Venice. So this is a pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much. The first question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
I think the best thing for a human being is to enjoy the moment, to be in
Yeah.
the moment as best as anyone can, to celebrate the moment, and I guess that's a simple answer for a complex question.
That's perfect. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Well, I think I listen the best when it's through my feelings. So I guess information can come through you kind of two different ways. It can come through your feelings, or it can come through your logos through a rational means. But I think it gets to a deeper place if it comes through your feelings, and usually that's through imagery.
Yeah, imagery, great. Why do you think humans collect or gather information?
Yeah, I think we're all fighting time, and we're all. That's the really one thing that's really against us all. And when we hold on to things, we're holding on to moments, and trying to cherish those moments. And I think that's fair too. Again, it goes against our your first question is,
Yeah.
it's enjoying the moment. When we're holding on to something, that's a past moment. And
Like we're living here right now. Well, no, that just zipped by. Right now.
right, right. So, a stone for every moment might make a nice house that'll bury you. You know.
That's funny. I mean, my goal in life once was to build a stone house. And as I put the last stone in, I die.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, every stone's a moment. You can just bury yourself.
Is this need to collect information, to gather information, more innate or more invented?
I think I'm not sure if there's a difference. I think that we're innately inventive to try to differentiate ourselves from our past, and we're trying to always better ourselves from our neighbors, and that's innate. But sometimes it takes an inventive mind to go back and answer your first question: is how do you put yourself back in the moment?
Yeah.
And so those things are always kind of working against each other. But I will say it's innate for us to feel unique, and it's inventive for us to remember that we're not.
Beautiful. Do thoughts create emotions?
I would like to say that thoughts create feelings that tie to our emotions, right? We could have thoughts that are purely rational thoughts that go into our rational string that don't necessarily grab on to feelings that create emotions. So I think you can have a really strong rational thought that might not ever touch a feeling or an emotion.
Yeah. Mike, I really appreciate your time and you really get what I'm after. I really love this. Thank you so much. Fill in the blank, Mike. I don't know what I think until I.
I guess I don't know what I think until I've moved past it, until I've digested it, till it's not I'm not in the reactive space from it.
Yeah.
Um, and I have to say that I sometimes it feels like minutes until I'm out of there, and then 2 hours later I realize that I was reactive even moments out of it, and then a day later I realized that I was still in a reactive space 3 hours after that moment, and so I guess it just depends on how tight you felt towards that, how tight your feelings were towards those emotions.
Yeah.
I think the more we learn about ourselves, the more we can see ourselves out of it. You can see yourself
Really.
reacting
Yeah.
and engaging in reactive behavior. That's
It's
a
really
tricky
beautiful.
thing.
It's a tricky thing. It's really well. You really articulated it well because uh, McLuhan says, "I don't know what I think until I say it." Joan Didion says, "I don't know what I think until I write it." But this, I don't know what I think until I move past it, is this reflective. Yeah, I loved your word digest too, till I digest it. And rather than being immediately reactive. And it made me think of an answer that I might give in the future. I don't know what I think until I forgot it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Like how you can't
it's
shake it. What you were talking about remind me of how you go, don't think about that anymore. Forget it. And then all your head is you're like, wait, why are you still thinking that? Forget it. Move on. It's done.
yeah. I guess that, and even if you're even, I think that you were on the same path there. If you've forgotten about it, you've moved past it, and
Yeah.
if someone brings it up again, you're able to see it on a broader perspective. You know, it's like asking an artist what he thinks about his painting right after he finished it versus 5 years after he did it
Yeah.
versus at the end of his life. Or a writer, I don't think you're going to get the same answer any of those times in any artistic way, and that shows the process of removal. It's like
Yeah.
it also shows like what are you making the art for? Are you making it for for someone to digest now, later, or or to look at it reflect in the chapter of your life, when you're gone.
Yeah.
I guess
That's
no one really thought of like how a Van Gogh painting looks like on socks. You know,
or a coffee mug. But
yeah. So
you evoked so much there, and we're going to get into art a lot in talking about it. A few more philosophical questions, but I wanted to tell you one of McLuhan's favorite lines is the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can, you know, which
yeah,
is a,
I mean,
it's a,
it's an
go ahead.
artful lifestyle. To live an artful lifestyle is like a delicate balance of making everything count.
Yeah.
And I guess that's an entirely different approach than we were born into as
Yep.
uh, post-war Westerners.
Yep. It is. And then, previous to what you were saying about time was David Lee Roth said, "Here today, gone later today."
Yeah, that's my ambition on a Sunday. I have to say, I have those ambitions.
Mike, can humans think without language?
Of course, of course. I mean, feelings come, I think, without language, and language packages those feelings. We're trained to package those ways so we can consume our feelings and we can share our feelings. But I think a lot of our core instincts come to us before we realize what's going on, right? Before
Yeah.
we put language to them, before we box them in a way that we can digest them.
Yeah.
Again, digest.
Yep. Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. What do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
I actually put myself in that place. For about 3-4 years, I used to sauna with a bunch of elderly Russians in a backyard,
Yeah.
and they all would. The process was when you meet up, you know, you sauna, and then you eat and drink, and all these older Russians would speak to each other, and I didn't speak their language, and it was really kind of a nice place for me to be. It was escapist, but at the same time, if I needed to communicate with them, I had absolutely no problems, expressing my body language or my facial language or in any way to show that I don't feel like language is the hurdle. It's it's understanding other people's feelings and being open to that language.
Yeah. Beautiful. Your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
When you say we, I mean us as in who?
Who is we, white man? Yeah, that's well, I mean, first of all, it's a stupid question because you can't separate feeling from being, but we invented the words feeling and thinking, so we think we can say we're more feeling or more thinking. I mean, just your observations of humans in general.
I don't know if I've have that broad of a stroke of observation. I think I'm in a bit of a bubble here in Southern California, and my education being predominantly in the West Coast, and my existence being mostly in North America. But um, I would say that that's a I would have to go past myself to really answer that question and I don't feel comfortable with that. So I would say personally, I I guess I don't necessarily feel comfortable knowing how I can answer that. But
That's fine. Yeah.
we as in North American Anglo white men, it's all of a sudden it just gets to be a I'm not. I don't know if I feel qualified to answer that question.
No,
I think
that's totally fine, Mike. It's fun because a woman a few months ago went, the word more doesn't function in your question, because 80% of people say we're more feeling beings. And then sometimes people say, no, we're more thinking beings. Bridget Bardot says, I don't think when I make love. And I'm like, good luck. You're doing the most sensuous thing. Or like people who meditate, don't think about thinking. So you can't really separate them. So it's not fair. It's the point of a lot of these either or questions are more just jumping off to talk about the topic. So
right.
here's
Well,
two.
I would have to say I think we're all rigged to. We're all born into a rigged system, right? To
Yeah.
and particularly me being lucky enough to have had a decent education and understand a lot of processes of thought and a lot of histories of thought. Um, I would say the older I get, the more I'm trying to shed all those processes and trying to tap deeper into my feelings.
Yeah.
Uh, but um, it's almost like a removal of all the suits and all the outfits we've been forced to put on our whole lives from the time we were sent to preschool and all the ways we were forced to judge ourselves relative to everyone else. It takes a long time to realize how many different compartments you've been put through, and to shed all those things, to really ask yourself, how do you feel about uh, how do you feel about your life today? How do you feel about consumption rates? How do you feel about trying to better yourself and how your parents raised you? A lot of those things are complicated things, and a lot, it's like you have to decide when and how to judge those things and when to give yourself a break. I would absolutely love to challenge Bridget Bardot and see if she's not feeling anything. If she's purely in her head. That's a beautiful idea, but I'd like to say that it takes two to tango. So
Yeah.
maybe she's not quite doing the dance.
and she probably said that years ago, but I just love it because it is a contrasting thing that and what you just explained reminded me of Fireside Theater, the comedy group. They said everything you know is wrong, or the name of our podcast is I'm probably wrong about everything. Like, how do you shed this stuff? Not necessarily that it's wrong, but how do you renew or reboot or, just rethink things and refeel things, reveal things. So
Yeah,
these are
well said.
these are two questions from Alan Turing, 1950s. First one is thinking a function of the soul?
I would say you need your you need thinking to shed those coats, to shed those layers, shed those jackets, shed those
Yeah.
uniforms that have been put on you since a young age. You need to self acknowledge that process in order to shed those layers off to really get down to your core feelings. So I would say yes, you do need self reflection for embetterment, and self
Yeah.
reflection to tap into your feelings, and self reflection to see all of us in the same dance,
Yeah.
time and place.
But again, is thinking a function of the soul?
Yeah. So again, I think you need, it's a tool to,
Yeah.
it's a tool we all need to use to expose to feel, to get in touch with our soul, to expose our soul to
Yeah.
others, to feel even more understood.
Yeah. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
I don't care.
That is a great answer, Mike. I rarely get that. I don't care. I love that. That was a great answer.
I mean, come on, really? I mean,
No, it's beautiful. Okay, next question. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I guess it's a kind of an arc of maturation, you know, um, and I think I was lucky to start that arc a little earlier through through some kind of earlier hardships in my life that helped me reflect on that question. Um, Absolutely nothing wrong with starting that arc out in innocence and enjoying the moment and chasing kind of spontaneous joy. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I think as life goes on, uh, I think we find it to be much more enduring to chase meaning than spontaneous happiness.
Yeah. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
I'm always thinking about that. Just the other day, I saw a remake of Pinocchio.
Yeah.
And speaking of conscious, and I started thinking like, wow, I read that book and that language and that narrative is deeper inside of me than I actually remember the tangible experience, you know, of the idea of conscious and what's right and what's wrong. And so I don't know. I think it's in what's is it innate or is it environmental? Hearing the early language of that Pinocchio and that conscious, I think it's a combination of both. Um, but I really think it stems from love. If you're
Yeah.
really getting good love foundation in your youth, then I think your consciousness and your ability to understand yourself in a larger picture is it comes faster, and you have a broader conscious for others. Where if you're not getting that love bank, you're not raised in a beautiful love bank and in a garden of love, then I think you're going to be much more shallow in your approach to that question.
Really cool, Mike. Thank you. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
I don't care.
You are great. I love this. Okay. Audre Lorde, the poet, said, "You can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools." Yvonne Rainer responded, said, "You can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?"
I've been with a having dialogue with a Jungian scholar every week for about 3 or 4. No, and I think we're in my fifth or sixth year now. And those tools I use oftentimes to evolve my thought and evolve and to self reflect. And again, I'm not really sure what kind of house he's talking about in that question. Like, I'm not sure. I never really felt like I always felt like I lived in a bit of a shed with half the roof always open. So I never really felt completely secure in my life, to feel secure in my ideals or secure in my approach. I guess I've always lived in a bit of a rickety shed, and I think I've always been a bit comfortable with that. And so to disassemble a house that necessarily never served as a house, that's a sticky thing. I guess it's presumptive that we all live in some secure space. And yeah, I mean, I might have felt that way up until about 15, and then I never felt that way again.
Really beautiful, Mike. When you said rickety, this background that you have set up is so beautiful because it's like a
All
sun.
right,
It's really beautiful, but there is that one little piece that's off. So
broken, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
it's broken, and it just when you said rickety, I was just like, it's so beautiful how you're framed. You're like you're an art director, an art guy, but that one little piece makes it so human. Um, what new toy do you suggest?
I think we all need a toy that'll put us in the moment.
Yeah,
As fast and accessible as possible. You know, for me, the most accessible toy is music and dance.
yeah,
I
wow,
mean, in many ways, I survived parenting through whenever I didn't know what to do with my daughter, I just put on some music and we started to dance, and that really helped pull us out of whatever was holding us back to not celebrate the moment. And I think I was lucky to be raised in a culture that loved music and made it accessible and made it okay to just turn up the music and turn out everything else. But since COVID, I've also been on an electric skateboard, which is which defies gravity, defies almost everything I've ever known in my life. There's no hills that flattens the whole landscape out. It's I found this behind me, just skating through alleys.
nice.
So I would say, everyone's got to have a song where they could just go to and disappear in.
Yeah,
And that's
yeah,
that's a sharp tool as far as I'm concerned.
that's a great tool. It's like Walter Pater said, all art aspires to the condition of music. So, like painting, poetry, literature, all wishes it could be as cool as music.
I agree, but the musicians wish it was more tangible so they can control the sale.
What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
uh, I definitely fight for meaning every day. Like I always feel like I need to be chipping away at something that I'm proud of. you know and if still have angst at night, it's probably because I didn't do that. I didn't do my best version of something, whether it would be parenting or pushing some of the other narratives I'm working on towards completion,
Yeah.
towards evolution. Uh, I don't know if I necessarily I mean, yeah, I have worried about food on the table. I have worried about, paying bills. I have worried about paying, the banks, but I am worried about that so many times that it's not as a soft a blow. I mean, it's not as hard a blow. It's become softer in my middle age.
Yeah.
I've realized no matter what, things move on and go on, and failure is really a momentary thing,
Yeah.
and potentially a lesson. You know,
Well put. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound, the poet, that artists are the antenna of the race. So, I mean by artists, musicians, poets, painters, authors. Artists are the antenna of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we may be able to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So I ask you, Mike, the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
right? Why do we ignore? You know, I that's a hard thing for me to digest myself. I think as a you go back to your Balinese example where they don't ignore, right? They're listening all the time and they're evolving. If something doesn't work artistically and within its function of society, then it probably is not made. But we continue to push things that are might serve a function but do not serve a purpose for each other. You know, like, and so I have a hard time with that. It's Stevie Wonder once said, "Fuck this, I'm out of here. No one's listening. I'm out." You know, and during the BLM movement, during COVID, I really, like everyone else, I had to find a new tool in the shed, and I pulled out an old tool. And it was Stevie Wonder. And I sharpened up his tool, and I listened to all his music all over again. It's like, and he was singing these songs essentially when I was born,
Yep.
and no one listened to Stevie Wonder then.
Wow.
And you could tell during when I'm listening to his music and watching the BLM movement, it's as pertinent as ever.
Yep.
Realize, wow, no one really is listening. When I grew up in Santa Monica, I assumed that things would evolve, you realize the contrasts of then and the contrasts of today. We're equal to each other, and think about all the great art that's passed between us from the '70s to today, and none of it rang into the ears of the world.
Yeah.
So I have to say that I've come to look at art as less of a cure for the masses and more a cure for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's purely and I think it may be a little bit sad, maybe a tarnished perspective, and maybe a bit reactive, and hope maybe I'll get out of that. But I look at it as a cathartic experience for the artist.
Yeah.
Maybe a few people within their reach, but it doesn't seem to stick, and I'm saddened by that. And such is
Well,
life. I look at artists, and I look at now I look at art, and I think of like it's a brand experience.
yeah.
I look at artists are making our brands, and like how do we make something in the same thing into 50 different types of medias. It's the same idea.
Yeah.
It's just a brand experience. It's one narrative. It goes, how do we make it's a canvas, it's a sculpture, it's a poster,
Yep.
it's something that, so I don't look at, there's no, either in that type of art there's very little narrative. It's just kind of like a quick easy, hey, it's a melting rainbow. What does that mean? I don't know what that means. It's just kind of nice to look at. And
Yeah.
but people consider that art, and I go, well, just because you can, I don't think you should. Doesn't mean you should. Just because you can paint a giant melting rainbow on a wall doesn't mean you should. It doesn't say anything, and no one's walking away from that any better.
Yeah.
And I get angry about it. It's like,
Yeah.
look here, as an artist, like, hey, okay, I just want someone to feel nice. Well, that's kind of illustration. That's not art. The artist saying something in between the lines that you walk away with, and it's that pebble that might turn into a stone, and all of a sudden you have to do something about this narrative. That's art, But
Yeah.
I don't see a whole lot of that going on.
Yeah, that was really emotional for me. It brought a tear to my eye because I'm really close to what Stevie Wonder's all about. Because I was born in Flint, Michigan, and he was born in Saginaw, Michigan. And he started having hits when he was a teenager, and he was blind. And he wrote this one song in the '70s called "Keep on Running," and I'll put it on every once in a while.
Yeah,
And it's like my heartbeat.
yeah,
And
yeah. I listen to it.
there's a line that goes, "Somebody's gonna get you. Somebody's gonna jump out of the bushes and grab you."
I was.
You gotta keep on running.
When Obama had a concert for Stevie in the White House,
I know, that was like amazing.
and I really wanted him to play Big Brother from the song and fucking stare right at him and challenge him. Your name is Big Brother, and you just visit me, and you're just invited me to the White House now.
Yeah. Right.
What are you really gonna do? Are you gonna fucking shake your stick or not?
Yeah.
I have to say that I think Obama went through the stream in the middle. He didn't really try to deepen the canal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty heavy. And all the power to him just to have the idea to have Stevie play in the White House. It wasn't like George Clinton says, "Let's paint the White House black."
Yeah, I think that's the truth of it. It's like, here he is singing in the White House and still no one heard him.
Yeah. Well, we heard him. Me and you heard him. So now here's the big question, Mike. Do artists have a moral obligation?
Why just artists?
Yeah. Well, you're answering a question with a question. You win. That's what this series is all about.
But I don't know. If art is really, like I just said, is a cathartic experience that broadens yourself, then it's our, of course, it's our personal responsibility to look at our experiences as broad as possible, to be as inclusive as possible.
Yeah.
As humans or as artists, and artists might have more tools, more gimmicks to use. And I mean that as a gimmick, color, sound, they're all just gimmicks hopefully to convey all the singular message,
Yep. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
I think new or old, it's obviously what you're most reactive to. I think a lot of ideas are recycled. I don't necessarily know if there's a whole lot of new ideas, but I think it's hard to respond to things that you're most reactive to. They're most challenging to yourself.
Yeah.
And sometimes a really great new idea could come in the packaging of like, you're wrong. And that's hard to take, and it's hard to absorb that and continue on. Like, maybe you're in the midst of working on this goal, and all of a sudden you realize you're wrong. How do you change course?
Yeah.
How do you change course with pride, and how do maintaining your self ego? And I have to say that old ideas, new ideas, I don't know. That's, again, I think, just branding.
Yep, it is totally. And you really evoked McLuhan's line: "Carefully make plans, then do the opposite." It's like, good luck.
Well, I think when you live in a shed that's always half exposed to the world, that's exactly what happens. You make plans, and then fate puts you where you are. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, but you can. It is involves risk taking or courage to do the opposite. If you make these plans, you're like, oh my God, I can't do the opposite. You know,
I
you,
think courage comes from a lot of failure. I
yeah,
think that's the trick
yeah,
and I don't know. I mean, I people will say that it takes a lot of courage to bull through things.
yeah,
And I don't know. Maybe to me, that's to be a bull is really is to just be reactive, and I don't know how much courage that takes. When
yeah.
I see bulls, I think that they're ballless.
My hero, Frank Zappa, says, I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure.
Yeah, yeah. Watch out where the huskies go, and don't you eat that yellow snow.
Mike, can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
One of the earliest memories I had was visiting my younger brother in the hospital when he was born, and seeing my mother. It was a C-section, not responsive. You know,
Wow.
asleep and not able to wake.
Wow.
And
Is yeah.
I
Is memory
remember,
more a curse or more a blessing?
as I mentioned before we got on, uh, my mom has deep dementia. She does not know who I am. She does not know who she is. She's very much like a fish in a fish tank. And I bring her a large hot chocolate and a couple donuts every day. I mean, every Sunday morning. And for an hour, she has her first sip of hot chocolate 30 times. And every time she sips it, she sips, oh my God, that's so good. Believe it. And then she sets it down. And then, I say, oh, Mom, cheers, cheers. And she picks it up again and she sips it again. She says, oh my God, that is so good. I can't believe it. So, looking at that situation, having your first 30 sips of hot chocolate in an hour seems to have a lot of value. But obviously, no one can function that way.
Yeah. Tell me someone within your immediate family, just briefly, and then outside your immediate family who had an impact on you, kind of like a role model, and what specifically was the impact?
Uh, was it first inside my family or first
Yeah.
outside?
Either way. Yeah, your choice.
That's a tough one. I'll start with outside.
Fine.
I was very lucky to have. I was a boys club kid in Santa Monica Boys Club, and I was lucky to have a coach. He was a writer. Actually, he was a writer for Cheers, Newhart, and Murphy Brown. A beautiful person named Tom Seeley. And my physical maturation was slower. I was a later bloomer, and I was having a hard time keeping up with the kids that were a couple steps into puberty or even post-pubescent. I was having a hard time questioning myself. And he said, and I basically I realized at a certain point, I said to him, I can't keep up. I was competing with mature bodies and more mature minds. And I just said one time, I was like, I can't. I said, I can't. And I remember there's this day he pulled me aside and he says, never say I can't. You have no idea what you got. You were given more gifts than anyone. Never say I can't. Just keep going. things will change. This is today is not tomorrow. You know, and he's kept on saying that today is not tomorrow. And he put his finger in my chest, and I was probably on the sidelines crying, not able to keep up. And I realized, like, okay, well, today I can fail today, but
Yeah.
you know, if I keep going, I might not fail tomorrow.
Yeah.
And that helped. That helped. But within the family, I would say it's always just mother's love, to be raised in that garden of love, the
Yeah.
completely unconditional love that I felt from my mom. I think enabled me to eventually shed more of these coats that I had to put on to become a young adult and to become a man. And that love gave me enough tools to self-reflect and learn to shed those superficial values and to really chase things that have meaning.
Yeah. Wow. Did were you raised a particular religion?
No, I was very lucky. I was not boxed in with religion. I was very lucky. Um, in fact, I was almost reactive against religion. Whenever I heard some type of dogma and people presented like a series of facts, I never really understood how they could just present things so factual and without any proof. And
Yeah.
I was a Boy Scout. I was in a great troop with amazing other dads that gave me so much, but I couldn't, even at a very young age, prepubescent, I really questioned all the Christian undertones of the Boy Scouts, and I was always very offended and angry that um, that the doctrine hadn't shifted into more inclusive narrative within the Boy Scout packaging.
Yeah.
So I was
Mike.
lucky, and I appreciate the narrative of religion as a series of principles of wisdom that we could take, but whenever someone wants to introduce it to me as dogma, I'm very sad that they can only see it that way.
Yeah. Do you pray?
I don't pray, um, but I do visualize things in ways that I hope them to be. I do visualize, you know, it's a tricky thing.
Yeah.
When you visualize things, you're also boxing in your future.
Yep.
So it's also very limiting. Um, I don't pray uh, in any traditional sense.
If God does exist, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Welcome, and
You,
you did the best you could. Thank you.
yeah, really good. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think loveless people exist.
Yeah.
People have experienced childhoods completely loveless,
Yeah.
and they and so a loveless childhood comes a loveless and angry, and obviously it all comes down to fear uh, that they felt of being alone their whole adolescent lives. So fear becomes anger, which becomes hate. And so,
Yeah.
whenever we're angry, it stems from fear, and a lot of that hateful language stems from the fear of always being alone.
Yep.
So I don't necessarily look at it as hateful language. I look at it as a person living in fear.
Yep. Well put. The real question I'm asking is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I set up with a few modern thinkers. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. My basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
What a tricky thing to say.
It is a tricky. That's true.
I would say that I guess to acknowledge an enemy would be to almost be something like that. That it's a fixed outcome. You're acknowledge like maybe if you acknowledge their fear and what, then you might acknowledge where they're coming from. You could shift that their hateful action or their aggressive behavior towards you. So if you maybe what Alan means by saying if you acknowledge your enemy, if you acknowledge the idea of an enemy, like it's a fixed thing, then it's almost insurmountable. But if you acknowledge an enemy as a temporal thing or a temporal condition, then maybe it's something that could be reconciled
Yeah.
through communication. Yeah, absolutely. I kind of like the idea of keeping your enemies closer because you can shift maybe that dialogue, right?
Yeah.
So, you know, food, music, you never know. You end up dancing and eating with someone, there might be room to shift that frame towards
Yep.
each other. There might be room to, you know, if you let go of that, me versus it, or me versus them, or me versus him or her, if you could shift out of that and put that away, then you know the space might be able to shift itself out of that black and white existence. And I think that that's what Watts was saying. Like, yeah, if you acknowledge that it's this or that, then you're always going to be in a black and white space with an enemy and a foe and all these things. But if you realize, maybe decide it's not that simple and things can change, and let's let go of what opposes us and let's take in what unites us. Maybe it's a passion for a space, or passion for music, or passion for food, and then maybe there might be a bridge to mend that relationship.
Yeah. American indigenous say your enemy is your best teacher.
Yeah, I
And
think that's absolutely right, because
yeah,
that's, even if your enemy, even if someone hates you, it has nothing to do with you.
that's
They
it.
can, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm I battle that all the time.
Yep.
Um, and if
You know,
you,
you start off with like be here now. Ram Dass has a good one too. He said, Ram Dass says, I'm having a real hard time loving George Bush. It's like fill in the blank. I'm having a real hard time loving Putin or Trump or whoever. It's like, what else can you do but love them? And then, someone in Venice once said, nope, I think hating's good. And I was like, ugh. But it is another, it was like, how can you process that emotion of hate? Because I'll ask you this now, because it's a response to that woman who was a great activist in Venice. Can anger be a productive emotion?
anger is a trigger, and it just depends on how you treat that trigger, right? You could treat it towards self acknowledgement, or you could treat it towards more anger. You know,
Yeah.
um, so I guess anger, fear, flight, all those things could be positive. It just depends on how you contextualize your steps from there. Um, you know, I guess I always look at it like kind of like the Last Supper, or even eating at a diner. You know, like Tarantino says, and I kind of mentioned it in the Googie Modern thing. Is like we could all be eating in a diner, 30 tables. There could be a beautiful, warm, loving family on one side of the kiosk, and a table full of murderers on the other side of the kiosk, and we're all looking at each other enjoying hamburgers. There's a bridge there, you know.
Yeah.
There's a bridge. Oh, look at that guy. No one knows it's fucking the second coming of Mussolini, or you know,
Yeah.
a night stalker. We just look at that person as a person that likes chocolate shakes, and
Yep.
that's kind of the irony of that's the irony of humanity, is that sometimes you could be next to someone that's full of anger and hate, and we might not be seeing each other in that context, and there still might be a kernel of a bridge, of a link that we can work off of.
The commonality, beautiful. In fact, Nassim Taleb says a great quote: games were created to give non heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who really won or lost, but you can tell who is a hero and who is not. So it's an interesting thought. When I said that to someone, they said, well, villains don't think they're bad, they want control. Heroes want freedom. So, Bates in the uh, do they go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? Or do they go, oh, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day and I got caught? So, the question, Mike, is does punishment work?
I don't know if punishment works. I question that. You know, I think I'm not sure if punishment works.
Yeah.
Frankly, my mom brought in two young boys when I was a kid, fostered them in between my blood brother and I, and they both came from two really separate places. One had, between his two biological parents, they each married and divorced 4 times before he was 15.
Wow.
The other one came from a family that was not did not have this. It was more of a structure of drugs and a structure of chaos, and they both came into our family needing structure and love, and both of them went on to their own worlds. One of them went into the mountains to grow marijuana, and one of them married into a Samoan family, surrounded themselves with love. One of them ended up in jail, and the other one ended up successfully still surrounded by love.
Wow.
I look at that as potentially an answer to your question, that no matter how many times I could have slapped these kids on the wrists, what changed them was love. What
Yeah.
changed the arc of their lives was love. It wasn't correction.
Yeah. Beautiful. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin about 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I think time is but the essence. Obviously, all these feelings are packaged when we go, and all these comparisons are packaged. But I also think it's because we're not always able to be in the moment as
Yeah.
humans, right? So we need we're not able to see things, you know, with the same context. Say you're driving down the street and you see this contradiction of, you know, looking through your car through a wealthy person's Beamer right through their car and seeing a homeless person. At a glance, you realize you see the contradictions of all humanity right there in a split second. But for some reason, it doesn't have the same meaning as where how if someone draws that up in a play or draws that up in a song. But either way, we know that no matter what, it doesn't really change us too much. You know, it's a
Yeah.
cathartic experience. We go home and we still we still make perpetualize our same errorist life.
Yeah. So,
So
Mike,
in many ways, I have to say it might just make us feel better that
yeah,
we're for ourselves. It's
yeah,
I mean, bookshelves full of books. Hey, look at me! I'm trying better. Hey, I'm swinging. Stacks of movies that we've all consumed, and
yeah.
name dropping and all that stuff. It's self. It's for ourselves, right?
Yep. No, it's amazing what you said. I appreciate that. You taught me a good lesson there, in fact. But
What do you
I'm
mean?
curious. Your sort of just briefly your path and becoming an author, and more so being an artist. Like, when it was the tipping point, did you go, "That's what I want to pursue"? Like, was your mom taking you to art galleries and art museums, nurturing your art thing, or you found it on your own? Just sort of walk us through, what'd you study in college, and then where did you go, "That's what I want to do"?
I was my dad is 6'8". My all my family are super tall. I was always raised to be absolute a basketball player, and anything else would have been secondary. Um, but I was also very lucky to be around. Grew up in Santa Monica, Venice, where I met other parents who were artists. Some very successful, some not so, and I realized it was a great. It was what it didn't really reach me, I should say, until I had more feelings and more that I knew what to do with. Right, things were coming at me harder, and I needed more tools to contextualize those feelings. Um, so when I was 17 years old, I was hiding from repo men, to hide from the cars that to hide. It was a shock to my system. I thought I would never have to question my. I didn't know that the ground and the earth and the house I grew up in was completely a shed when it was, in truth, worth exponential amounts of money.
Yeah.
When I turned 18, I was hiding from people trying to serve me to serve my father. I would look out the window and I would see PIs waiting for me to walk outside. Before I was 17, I was hiding my mother from being served in and out of this house. So I had a lot of things that I thought were solid. The rug got pulled from me, and I needed to find more tools to understand those feelings. And there was a man named John Ashby that was the ghostwriter for the Wilt Chamberlain book, and he was a
Wow.
big name uh, at that in a lot of in Los Angeles. I think he taught at UCLA. He was a ghostwriter, but he also wrote a lot of other writings. But he's also a figure sculptor. He did these kind of figure sculptures in wax that looked like Ernie Barnes. And he was friends with Ernie Barnes. And he did these. I walked into his apartment, and he was a basketball junkie like I was. And he had these giant life-size sculptures of athletes doing Olympic activities. And he was watching sports. And I was like, wow, those sculptures, when I walked into his apartment, helped me realize that I could express my feelings. And so I got into art through figurative art, which I think is very much related to sports. And then from figurative art, I was open to the world of art at large. Um, so I've always used art as a tool from a senior year on. And Obviously, being young and full of ego, I think we all wanted to chase greatness, but pretty quickly I decided that it was more important to chase your next meal.
Yeah.
And I have a hard time understanding, like, obviously we live in a very expensive Los Angeles, very expensive state, a very expensive country. I look at it now, the to chase art as a full time career is almost like a bourgeois lifestyle. I don't even look at, someone tells me they're an artist. It's very hard. And that's part of my trigger is it's very hard to understand what that means to them. How are they doing it? And it's almost like architecture. It's like, there's architecture. There's only a few architects that really do great or are able to get by, and everyone else is essentially, even to go to architecture and pay off architecture school, you have to be full of money. It's like even to go to
Yeah.
art school and pay off art school from a shit art school job when you get out of college, it's completely you're bound by, you know. If Robbie Canal was really my friend, he should have told me to get the fuck out of college and stop paying for this bullshit.
That was good. Well, look at Mike. Let's talk about your art just for a second. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. When you're making a piece of art, not as an ad man or, whatever you want to create something, what role does intention play in your creative process?
I guess I look at the first thing art has to do is grab you.
Yeah.
You have to have that wow right away. But then past the wow, you have to be able to drop something with the viewer that takes them home, that they can take home, consume, and self-reflect. Um, I get pissed off at all the movie makers because for some reason they're given an hour and a half to do that. In fact, you walk into a movie theater and somehow, for some reason, culturally, it's just okay to open your veins and just absorb someone else's bullshit for an hour and a half. And you're stuck in that chair and you just assume it's okay. And versus you go to see a painting, and if someone spent 10 years on it, you might give it 10 seconds.
That's it. Amazing.
So I get very, I'm a little touch and go about art. What was your question?
Well, no, you handle it because let's go into.
Well, I want to know.
It was more like the role of intention in the creative process, and in the follow-up question you really answered. I'll ask it because you can flesh it out more. Duchamp said, "There's no art without an audience." How much are you thinking of your viewer when you're creating your art?
I'm thinking of the experience. I think understanding narrative helps you bring in that, that a lot of people are really good at that wow moment.
Yeah.
And just because you're good at that wow moment doesn't mean you should make art.
Yeah.
I think you need to have the wow moment, but you have to have something that's beyond the moment. It's something that you can take home and enable, did I understand sorrow better?
Yeah.
Did I understand joy better? Do I understand the people on the other side of the hemisphere better? I don't know. But I think there has to be something there that broadens you, and it brings in that empathy, right? Brings in a larger consciousness. And I just don't see that very much,
Yeah. Well, great filmmaker, experimental filmmaker Hollis Frampton said, narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we're waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
Absolutely, you can forget to die. Going back to my mom, she's forgotten to live. I'm sure you can forget to die. And, and I look at her, I think she's forgotten that she's dead.
Yeah.
But I think that there is an ego to be remembered, and um, as part of our ego is to be remembered. And but then the irony of that is when we remember history, we look at it like how we're better than the past, right? It's like we look at the past like we've evolved beyond the consciousness of the time. And in many cases, that's true. But if you look at consciousness as like a series of building blocks, then you realize it's like, have you taken 3 steps higher than the previous generation that took 2 steps higher? I look at it that way, and I don't. Going back to like our conversations about Stevie Wonder, who was putting it all on the line, saying everything that needed to be said 50 years ago, and you could almost say we're at a complete plateau.
Yeah.
Since then,
Yeah.
and nothing has evolved on a broader consciousness. So, where has that put art in the last 50 years? Has any artist really been a hero? If that's the case,
Yeah.
has any art been a hero? Has any story been a hero? If that's the case,
Yeah. Totally agree. I mean, so much you covered. In fact, 2 of my film heroes, one says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mika says, there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Yeah, I know it's a stupid question. It's both and it depends. But basically, is art making more self-expression or more your vehicle for whatever culture, technologies, and environments are dominant?
obviously we're all tied to our technology in one way or another. I mean, no one's going into a cave making cave art. I don't know. Maybe someone is, but and I look at the process of making art as so fortunate.
Yeah.
It's such a lucky thing to do
Yeah.
that I almost just look at it as a classist act, right? So I look at someone who's able to spend their whole lives making art. I guess I just look at them as completely fortunate, lucky, and whether they're a product of one side of your question or the other, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They're doing the dance. Shut the fuck up and keep dancing. You're lucky.
That is it.
It's like,
yeah. Can art making be egoless?
well, I view art differently now. I like great teachers could be artists, and that I think is great teachers can lift the soul, and that could be an art.
Yeah.
I look at the caretakers that look after all these mindless individuals in my mom's dementia care facility, and in many ways, the way they treat their clientele is art. It's beautiful.
It's an art form. Totally
It's
beautiful.
completely egoless.
Yep.
Even the way they bring my mom to me, I know it takes great love and preparation, and it's completely egoless, right? They're mopping up shit. They're putting some dead person's shoes on another person's shoes. They're putting some other old dead lady's bra on a new lady's bra. And to see that and know that there's no answer for their own lives. They probably don't know what they're doing in 6 months to a year. There is absolutely no security, but they're able to go on past that and bring their best to people like my mom. Those people are the artists that I want to idolize. It's really easy to kind of go, yeah, well, I want to have a big studio space and I want to have all the time and paint and, well, yeah, That's like projecting yourself into great architecture on top of a hill. It's just,
Yep.
you know, your ego has to be a little bit wiser than that, a little broader than that. And in architecture, I still feel it's very mature. You know, like when I look at art and architecture, everyone just wants the house. When people think, "Oh, I love architecture," no, you just love looking at fucking rich people live. You know, 9 times out of the 10. I'm sorry to say.
Don't be sorry, man. This is the prime shit I want my podcast to be saying. you know,
Yeah,
I just sort of ask the questions and allow the person. But when I can relate to what Mac Gleason's book, it says most art sucks.
yeah,
And not to make this value judgment, but you know what I'm saying.
yeah.
It's
I mean, at what point will generations not even listen to Stevie Wonder, right? Like,
yeah,
if I put on a Stevie Wonder song for my daughter, she thinks it's a cover of a of a
yeah,
of another person's song.
yeah.
I'm sorry,
Well,
I'm going to move into another space.
no, that don't be
There's
sorry.
behind me.
This is beautiful. I love it. So, what was you brought it up and anticipate a lot of questions. I really appreciate it, Mike. What was the motive of the cave artist? What's your hunch or guess?
My guess was is to, for is to tell the, to not feel alone.
Yeah,
I think to go back to like a loveless life, to go back to a loveless infancy creates so much fear, anger, and hate. And if we understand ourselves contextually through generations, then we realize maybe we're less alone
yeah,
and we're less angry at the mud we're like stomping through. We understand that it's not just you. We're all in this shit house together.
together. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, obviously the ego is going to say conviction, and love will say compromise. Love for each other will say compromise. You know, that's a tough thing. You know, as a parent and as a person that likes to make art, I always felt that those two things really conflicted.
Yeah.
You know, to be a great parent is to see yourself through your child and to understand what they need and what will nurture them the best to live the most conscious and broadest life. And to be an artist is to be stuck in your head. You know, is to and to listen to your narrative and to listen to your feelings and to structure those things into a concrete idea. But those two things are always at play with each other. At least they are for me. And I would probably say the older I get, the easier compromise will be.
Yeah,
Right? Um, but sometimes I absolutely feel like leave me the fuck alone and let me do some things so I can feel like I'm part of this cabaret of life, that I'm part of the parade, you know,
yeah,
and part of the failures. And so I don't know. It's again, you're asking these questions that are one or the other, and I'm saying it's neither.
yeah. No, that's good. In fact, Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Uh, I mean, I know I was a dyslexic child, and to overcome that, I think I got to school an hour before everybody else. And I think I stayed up until sixth or seventh grade, an hour or two after everybody else, just to get done what everyone else did in their normal school day. So I think understanding the conviction was good habits, not good gifts.
Yeah.
Um, and I and I took, I think, that same kind of conviction and I applied it to sports, and then that same conviction I applied it to arts and design and authoring, and I realized that, to go back to your conviction, yeah, is, stick to itiveness, which is one of the great made up words in sports, is a great way to apply yourself. Um, but I would say that having the roof pulled out of me in my teenage years financially, going from being very considered to be very wealthy to you know to having nothing, obviously shook the core of my system and core of my values, made me question my father and what he chased his whole life. It made me question my mother and what she did to protect us, and it made me question a lot of the relationships that I had and a lot of the way that people saw me, and it made me question the way I saw myself. And being shifted from one class to another definitely jars your character and makes you self-reflect and makes you pick out your own compass and point in the compass and follow. I wasn't told what to do because I couldn't, because I was thrown into chaos.
Well, Utah Phillips, great folk singer, activist, said, "Anarchy is making rules for yourself and not others. Who's entitled to make the rules?"
I don't know if I don't know if I'm wise enough to make any rules, frankly, particularly about other people's. But I mean, when you say about myself, I think the main rule is to ask yourself: have you given everything that you can?
Yeah.
Have you given this the best version of yourself? It's simplistic, but it's thorough.
Yeah.
And I was lucky to kind of like to be frame a lot of my. If I was afraid of something, I knew that preparation would always help, but to not judge the outcome was always the best, and to judge the effort.
Yeah.
Uh, that's hard when you look at things you can't control, like your mother's dementia and what to do, or your child's inability to take the easier lesson of listening versus the hard lesson of life.
Yeah.
These things, there's only so much you can do.
Mike, we got about 10 more minutes. I really appreciate your time and energy here. How do you find peace of mind?
I don't know if that's really like I'm not really sure if that's really a thing. Um, Peace of mind. I think it's a temporal thing, maybe. Maybe just after Bridget Bardot, you know. But but it, I'm not really sure if I'm buying peace of mind.
That's good.
I think that obviously I'm judgmental on myself, and I place judgments on other people, and that's a that's a that's a good and bad thing.
Yeah.
And a peace of mind seems like you're at the end of the road. Like there's nothing left to be hungry about. There's nothing left to yearn for. There's nothing left to dream about. yeah, you can, peace of mind, like, oh, one day it'll come. It's too soft for me, peace of mind.
It's great. I love it.
I
That was
think
really good. It was a nice way to take it and recontextualize it, whereas people generally say it is attainable, or they just go, I can't find it. But it was beautiful. It was a very unique original answer. I appreciate that. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
I would say you have all the tools.
Yeah.
Don't question yourself. Don't look back. And when you finish school, go. Don't
Yeah.
look back.
Yeah.
Don't tie
Really.
yourself to don't tie yourself to the betterment of others. Help yourself before you can help other people.
Yeah.
Because if your draws are down, you can't pick up other people's draws. If
Yeah.
you're down, you can't help nobody if you haven't squared yourself. And in my youth, I I had the ego, enough overblown ego, where I thought I could do both,
Yeah.
and I failed at both.
Well, Mike, it's really inspiring what you just said. And I know you've succeeded too, because the way we met was through the Venice Heritage Museum, which is really uniting community and finding that commonality in humanity. So I want to thank you for that. Here's 5 Alan Watts questions just off the top of your head in a few words. First one, who started it all?
It doesn't matter. Stupid question.
Are we going to make it?
No.
Where do we put it?
Put it in front of ourselves and celebrate it.
Who's cleaning it up?
Unfortunately, our children.
Yeah. Is it serious?
Is it serious? I think it's serious because sleepless nights are serious.
Yeah.
Pain is serious.
Yeah.
Loss is serious. That fear that we talked. Loveless life, child, loveless children grew up in loveless environments. That's serious.
It is.
Consequences of serious. Yeah, yeah, it's fucking serious. Of course, it's
Yeah.
serious.
Wow.
Hunger is serious.
Yeah.
I mean, homelessness. It's all serious. It's. I think it's easy to say, oh, we all die, but yeah, but living could be hell. And to know that is, it's a tricky thing. I live with a roof over my head. Am I fighting every day for someone else to have the same?
Yeah.
No, I'm not. I don't know.
Yeah, Mike, where do you think you got this? Because what I have observed spending this time with you is you have what I call a higher awareness level. You have an awareness level. You're like, you consciously want to know. Do you think you got that more from the way your parents raised you, or more on your own?
I don't know if my parents were consciously raising me, right? I think that they were unconsciously living their life. And it took me a long time to realize that they were not conscious raising me. They were reactive in their own lives. And that had a, and that's the space that I grew up in, the combination of fairly good genes put me where I am, you know. I'm reactive in some ways to things that uh, I think people are less connected with. You know, I don't know. Um, I think that my genetically there's a compassion. There's definitely some big hearts in my family, but you know the way I was raised, I don't necessarily consider myself a. I'm like a byproduct of my parents. I'm not a conscious product of my parents.
Yeah.
And I
Is
say that about everybody, I guess. I don't
yeah.
know.
Well, no, Frank Zappa had a great anti-drug commercial in the 60s. He said, "Don't do speed. It will turn you into your parents." And it's sort of funny, but it's actually, I don't think we have a choice. The DNA and the way our parents raised us, we become our parents in a way. And in another way, if your parents an alcoholic, you might not become an alcoholic. If your parents an alcoholic, you might be in your DNA. So they definitely have a big impact. But I think you sussed out a bigger picture, like how conscious were you becoming Mike on your own rather than, their son?
Yeah,
So,
I think I had a lot of, and I was fortunate to have some choices. You know, I didn't have to chase art. You know, I didn't have to
yeah,
chase meaning in what I did. I think a lot of that was reactive to um, the way I was raised. My father he chased money and he chased things that fulfilled his own ego. But maybe again, I'm the same person. I'm just chasing things that fulfill my ego in a different way. I don't know.
yeah.
I'm not really sure I can draw that picture.
Well, I think one thing I've learned from talking with you is you're a pattern recognizer because you're after the big picture, which is comprehensive awareness. So McLuhan called it suspended judgment. Whether you say, well, art is good or art is bad, or this is good or this is bad, you say, this has services and disservices. How can we suss out the big picture and turn the disservices into services? You know, so anyways, I got three more and we're out of here. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
Cultural shift. I mean, I think we're kind of just beginning the kind of ideas of inclusivity, cultural shifts.
Yeah.
I mean, when I say that, I mean maybe another 100 years. I mean, I don't even 200. If it's if we're looking at Stevie Wonder 50 years ago and saying there has been little change, then I'm not really sure what a cultural shift means. Maybe a cultural. Um, I'm not sure. Cultural shifts. I'm not. I think that it kind of assumes that it's conscious,
Yeah.
and I don't think cultural shifts happen that way. But I will say that that global markets, having the ability to go no to take out the middleman, to go buy something from somebody on the other side of the world empowers that person on the other side of the world, not everyone else in between. And that the more we do that, the more we balance power amongst everyone else on Earth. But I think as Westerners, we're going to be very reluctant about that because it's going to lower our quality of life
Yeah.
significantly, and we'll fight for that with our own ego for another 100, 200 years.
Yeah.
I mean, so everyone says, oh, I was raised by boomers. Everyone's going, oh, you're not going to live as well as your boomer generation. Like that was a big knock on us. Like, well, that's probably good. that we don't live, but the truth is, even to live slightly less than, we have to take our relationship of my Gen X versus boomers, and you take that versus, say, northern hemisphere versus southern hemisphere, or and go, okay, well, it's not just boomers versus Gen X. It's like it's distribution channels and all these things have to be completely leveled out for people for humanity to have access to equal access to all the greatness, all these things. And I think we're not going to give that up as Westerners very quickly. But
Yeah.
at least we're talking about it as Westerners. Like, okay, as Westerners, everyone, how do we become inclusive? What does inclusive mean? Just the idea of the word inclusive being prominent in our doctrine, I think, is helpful. I guess you can consider that a cultural shift.
Yeah.
Having
But
that.
it is again, you sussed out, there's a bigger picture. Whose standards? What's the context? So Thornton Wilder said in 1928, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. Mike, I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this, but what's it really all about for you?
Well, I'm still always trying to learn that, but I think it's being conscious enough to enjoy the moment,
Yeah.
and not to overburn the candle, but to also enjoy the light.
Yeah.
So
Not overburn the candle. That's good. Enjoy the light.
that's a delicate balance. It's the only one liner I ever felt good. It's a very complex equation to live simply,
Yeah.
and there's millions of micro decisions we make to maintain a simple course and simple perspective, and there's a lot that can go wrong. And if I do it right, then I'm enjoying the moment, and I'm hesitant about the next, and conscious of what my past is, how my past is framing my present and future.
Yeah. What a treat. I really appreciate this, Mike. The last question is, what gives you the most optimism?
Music.
Wow. Nice.
Music, the way we react to music, the way humans seem to just, music is by far the most accessible art form. It's the most hypnotic art form. And seeing people taken by music, at least for that moment, we're all transfixed and on a similar place. And that's very optimistic. The more we sang together, the more we might feel we're together.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big hootenanny right here in Venice, man. We sing together. But, the first question is, what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich says the best thing for a human being is another human being. And the last question, what gives you the most optimism, is what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he says, other people. So I want to thank you for sharing this time with me, Mike, and especially give you kudos for all the work you do in the Venice Heritage Museum in uniting other people and finding commonality in the community to celebrate our history. Wyndham Lewis has a great one that summarizes a lot of your attitude about be here now, live in the moment. He says, artists live in the moment and write a detailed history of the future. It sounds like gibberish, but it's really, all times are happening now. And so why not enjoy this? I really thank you for your time, Mike. It's really been emotional and a learning experience for me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jerry, and thanks for your help with Venice Heritage.
I love it. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends and we can go on talking forever and ever, man.
Yeah, let's make some more things.
I love it. Thank you. Make